everyone, and welcome to the Marymount University's Living Lodge Copenhagen Center's workshop for the month of January. We are honored to host, and today we have our guest, Dr. Marnel Niles Goins, who is the dean here at Marymount University, and she's for our college as well as the first African American woman to serve as president for the National Communication Association, as well as a plethora of other things that she has on her plate. So we really appreciate you stopping by, taking this time out to be with us today, Dr. Niles Goins. I fangirl over you all the time, and so I talk about you in my classes to my students. So I'm excited that they get the opportunity to actually meet you today. So we'll jump in. The workshop is designed to be 1 hour with our audience in person, but thankfully we do record this and we share it with the other satellite students for folks who might not be able to join. So we'll just go on ahead and jump right on in right now. So I know a little bit about you, but can we just start, just give us a little bit of background about yourself, Dr. Niles Goins, and if you could share a little bit about the trajectory of your career that has brought us to this moment.
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here. Melissa, she didn't ask. She told me, Dr. Harris, that I was going to be doing this for the month of January. And before I start talking about me, I do want to talk about her. And this is very unexpected, I'm sure. But I first met her when I was a professor at Fresno State, California State University, Fresno. I don't know what year it was, 2007, 8, something around there. And Melissa was my undergraduate student. And she ended up getting her master's degree from Fresno State, and I was her advisor for her master's thesis. And Melissa had been in California, I think, for most of your academic career and work career at that time. And I told her she needs to go just for a little bit. So I sent her to DC, and she went to Howard University, which is my alma mater, for her PhD, and she has not returned. So I have really, it's really pleased me to just see your growth and your trajectory, Melissa, Dr. Harris, and I'm really proud of you. So thank you for putting this together. It's nice to be here. A little bit about me. So I'm going to just kind of go quickly over this. And if you want details, you can ask, I guess, in the Q&A later. Born and raised in Philly, and I did my undergraduate work in communication at Oakwood College at the time, now Oakwood University in Huntsville, Alabama. It's an HBCU, or historically Black college or university, and I had a wonderful time there. After that, I went to Howard University in DC for my master's and my PhD. So I was in DC for about 5 years immediately after my work in Alabama. And after that, I went to California State University, Fresno, where I was an assistant professor and then an associate professor and then a full professor. After that, I came back to the DC area and became an associate dean and then a dean at Marymount University. And in terms of my work with the National Communication Association, or I guess the communication discipline in general, I've always, from the time I was a master's student, participated in the National Communication Association. And at the time when I was on the East Coast, the Eastern Communication Association, which is like a smaller regional association. So I presented papers. And at some point, if you just kind of walk around, somebody's going to ask you to serve in some capacity. And I distinctly remember being at the Western States Communication Association. This is once I moved to California, and someone asked me to serve on Legislative Assembly, which is the governing body. And I said yes. I don't know why I said yes. I said yes because they asked me. And I remember just being really, really nervous. I had just become a real like professional in the field. And then I had the time of the meeting and my phone. And when I got there, I think I was like 30 minutes late because somehow I just got the time wrong. And I went to the door and I was just so embarrassed and nervous that I just turned around and went back. I just didn't go at all because I was so nervous. That was the only time though that happened after going to the conferences the National Communication Association conferences and the Western States Communication Association conferences, I became more comfortable with the people. And so I helped to plan one of the conferences in Monterey. And then I served on other committees. And then eventually for the Western States Communication Association, I became president of that organization. I was the first Black president. And then eventually with the National Communication Association, I ran and now I'm president right now of the association. So a lot of it is through service, but most of it is through creating relationships with people. And that's how I moved up into kind of this role from talking to people and from being asked to volunteer and then eventually volunteering myself for various roles.
So I'm just gonna back up a little bit on something
Yeah.
that you said. So you said yes, you said yes. When do you say no? That's the question I think a lot of us kind of deal with when we're asked to volunteer, we're voluntold to do things
Yeah.
and all kind of things like that. So when should we say no? When is a yes prudent for you career-wise, and when should you
Yeah.
say no?
Good question. And the reason I'm saying specifically it's a good question because I'm going to tell us a story about you, Dr. Harris. When we were, I think, at the National Communication Association, and we were in a meeting for the Black Caucus, which is almost like a subset of people in that organization. And they were looking for volunteers to I think serve on the committee for the Black Caucus, maybe the chair or something. And Dr. Harris was nominated by someone in the audience. And the first thing that she did, do you remember?
I told them I had to ask you. I could not
Yeah,
say
she
yes.
turned and she looked at me like, is it okay? And I was like, absolutely not. Like, no, no. And so she raised her hand and said, no, I am unable to do it because I recognized just the immense level of service that Dr. Harris was already doing, not just at Marymount, but also within the communication discipline. So for me, I'll say, because I didn't know initially what I was doing and everyone was asking me to do all these things, I had a really great couple of mentors who helped me. So Dr. Orlando Taylor, who was the first Black president of the National Communication Association, was really helpful for me. He recently passed last week. And even Ron Jackson, Dr. Ron Jackson was the second Black president of the National Communication Association. And I would just kind of run things by them as well as some other people like, hey, as I think about what I want to do, where I want to go, what are the service opportunities that I should say yes to? And serving in NCA was in direct alignment with the trajectory that I had for my life.
Awesome, because that speaks to like mentorship, especially when we're talking about ladies first and entering spaces where we normally have not had such prominent leadership positions, and just like the burden of wanting to say yes because you want the opportunity again leads to one of the questions that I just got in the chat. So how can you politely say no without risking future opportunities and
Yes.
invitations?
Yes. So the mentor is not just someone who tells you. The mentor will sometimes tell someone else to leave you alone. And I'm going to actually, add a little bit. The mentors I mentioned were two Black males. My first mentor at Fresno State was a white male. So mentors don't always have to look like you. And I distinctly remember him saying, "Hey, do not do this because you don't have time to do it, and it will literally like suck the life out of you in terms of your goals." So as you think about the mentor, think about not necessarily what their identity is, but think about if they can really support the goals you have for yourself. And he really did. And he also spoke up for me in meetings when I did not feel as if I could speak up for myself. But I'll say, if you're in a space that is safe, for example, a no is okay. If you've got, for example, with the National Communication Association, if someone were to ask me to do something and I would say no, because I had that relationship with that person and because often they understand that I'm already doing an immense amount of service, my no, without even explaining it in great detail, is good enough. And I also say as a leader, if someone tells me no, because I want them to do something, I also have to respect that and understand that, many of us are out serviced and tired. Um, hopefully that's not really too early in the career because there's plenty of time in your career to really get tired. But as a leader, I would expect that other leaders would understand and appreciate a no, and hopefully that no will turn into a yes, maybe in a couple years if the time is right. So don't be afraid to say no. Just be nice. You don't have to
Yeah.
offer detailed explanation. It's like, I can't do it. I'm sorry.
Just your no just stands by itself. And I've been told by mentors before, when you say no, just let it stand, because if you give a reason why it can't be no, then someone can find an opportunity to tell you why they can turn that no into a
Mhm.
yes. So
Yes,
just kind of, you have to sometimes sit in that no when it doesn't work for you, and
right.
just let it be on its own.
Yes.
And so I love the fact that you pull that out. And I'm often telling my students about mentorship, that mentors are more than just you go to when you need something. But if
Mhm.
they're looking out for you and you have that relationship with them, you kind of will know. It's like that opportunity, that when you, what you're talking about, they all kind of looked at me in the room and they were like, you really, almost like, you gonna go ask your mom if you can do it. I was like, I trust her because she's helped guide me in my career up to this point, right?
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have a problem, they can come see me, right?
And nobody wanted to mess with you. So I
Yes,
love that. I
yes,
love that.
yes. But I'll also say, Dr. Harris, people do say, like, you just say a no and don't give an explanation because somebody will find a way to persuade you. Sometimes people will, if you have a good relationship with them, adding that
Mm-hmm.
extra tidbit of like, I can't do it right now, I'm swamped.
Mm-hmm.
That's, sometimes people like to know that. And if
Right.
it's a direct supervisor, if it's someone that you work with closely, that also gives them an idea of what your workload is like.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on the relationship you have with that person, sometimes adding a little bit more information won't necessarily be used against you, but it helps them to understand that maybe that person's workload is too much.
Mm-hmm.
And so if one of my faculty members says no because they're doing all these things, then it doesn't mean that I want to ask them to do more, but it might mean how can I then help this person have a reduced workload or manage their schedule better or offer some professional development opportunities that will help them get to where they're going so they're not having this heavy load. So I don't
Absolutely.
say no to everybody, just like this one word, because sometimes
Mm-hmm.
4 words really help depending on who you're working with.
Okay, absolutely. Love that. And I think that would lead to, as the question said, you can be invited again later. So if you give some context, that polite no might mean that the door will be open for you again later. So that kind of answers that question in the chat. That's awesome. Okay, so we're going to just go on ahead and move forward. As you all have questions, just go on ahead and drop them in the chat. I appreciate them as they come in. So how has your work as an academician and an administrator prepared you for previous and current leadership roles? Because you do have a lot on your plate and you've done a lot in the past, but
Yes.
like, so how do you merge the two, because you didn't necessarily start out as the president of NCA. You gave us a little
No.
bit of background, and you
Right.
didn't start out as a dean either. So how
Right.
did what are kind of the steps that led you to this moment for the leadership?
Communication people are really interesting, like the way that they think and the way they disagree. So being a student, undergraduate and then graduate and then faculty member helped me to really understand how people in the field of communication think and argue. And because of that, I have a really high level of respect for faculty in general, faculty in the humanities and faculty in social sciences, because sometimes, you know, just telling someone, hey, this is how we're going to do it doesn't really work for communicators, people who study the field of communication. Sometimes they need to have an argument or a discussion and let you hear their differing ideas, even if I come with the same conclusion. Just being able to talk with people in the field that helps them to make sense of the world. So communication folks are just generally sense makers. Knowing that and working with them has helped me really tremendously as a dean, because I've got, in the College of Sciences and Humanities, I've got engineering, I've got English, I've got criminal justice and politics and communication and biology, and digital writing and narrative design. So I've got students and faculty who think very differently about the world, about their degrees, about their disciplines. And being a communication has helped me to understand that. So some people are just thinking like, okay, it's black and white, and maybe there's a little bit of gray. And I can understand that. I studied math and I can understand that way of thinking. But then you've got faculty members who want to talk about it a little bit more and who want to maybe what seems like disagree, but they're really trying to make sense of the discussion. And that to me helps me to not personalize it. And then I can also make sense of it and talk through it with them. And then as an administrator, I don't think I realized, like once I became president of NCA, that I'm using the same part of my brain that I'm using as a dean. So being a president of an organization, like a learned society is what they call it, is, responding to faculty members' complaints and issues. So some may be in, Texas or Florida and saying, hey, academic freedom is on the line. My job is on the line. What can you do as an association to help me? It's about planning a conference. It's about strategically planning for the future of the association. It's about budgeting. It's about our publications. It's about teaching and mentorship. And a lot of these things are the same things that I'm doing in my work position as a dean at Marymount, like planning and sense making and budgeting, the same part of my brain, except times two. So the prep that I put into it, it's not just like the conference planning, it's everything from the time I was a student up until now.
And so it's really interesting, like you were saying, as a dean, you have people from different different backgrounds,
Yeah,
different fields that you have to deal with. As the president of the National Communication Association, there are several divisions and there are
yeah,
several caucuses.
yeah.
How do you address the need? And so everything is not necessarily your specialty. So if you
Right.
can give us a little bit of your background and what you did as a communication scholar, and then just kind of answer, how do you be all things to all people as the president, or can you be all things to everyone and
No,
address their needs within the
no, no.
association?
Yeah, I cannot be all things to all people, but what I can do and be is someone who is ethical, someone who works to make sure the strategic plan, the 5-year strategic plan, is being realized. And I'm saying this both for Marymount and for NCA, and someone who makes decisions based on a lot of different information. So I can't be all things to all people. When I studied communication at the undergraduate level, I wanted to be an artist. Like I wanted to draw and paint and write stories, and that kind of moved into me studying public relations and then math, right? Because I love math. Um, and so as I think about like, moving into communication and then now being a dean that encompasses programs that aren't like me, like there's really great value in understanding biology and engineering. And these are people who create just like me. These are people who have issues about student access and who ask questions about, teaching strategies for the class. These are scholars in their fields. And so even though I'm still learning about the research that some of my faculty are doing, like my eclectic background helps me to understand the research, but it also helps me to be a dean that can manage different parts of my college and still make sense of it. And I'm saying sense making a lot because that's what I studied. So when I think about communication, I study organizational and small group communication, how people communicate and make sense in organizations, organizational culture. But we've got 65 different interest groups and caucuses, from, freedom of expression to like the Black Caucus, to performance studies, to organizational communication, health communication, mass communication, PR. I can go on and on. I'm not going to list all of them. But what I can do instead of being all things to all people is make sure that they have the support and the resources that they need to move NCA towards its strategic plan. And I'm saying strategic plan because that's like what keeps us together, our guiding light in a sense, even though we've got all these various sections of the association.
So I'm going to jump that least that's a great segue into one of the questions that I had for you. So you all set up strategic plans, and so there's succession planning within the National Communication Association. So when you take the role, when you take a role within the organization, how did you get to be president of NCA? Is it just like you ran for president, or how did it happen? I know it, but just kind of
Mhm.
share with the
Yeah,
folks
yeah,
here. And then as you do that, how do you leave your mark within these organizations? Because you
right.
were also the first Black woman president of Western States Communication
That was the first
Association.
Black president of WSCA.
Wow. So like being that
Yeah.
first, how do you leave a legacy? Because you're building on your legacy. So when they look at the roster of who was the president in what year, so how
Mhm.
do we know what does Marnel Niles Goins leave on these organizations as a trademark as part of her legacy? So
Mhm.
that's a double barrel question. So you're how'd you
Yes.
get to where you are, and then how do you do legacy planning to make
Right.
sure that when you leave the organization, it's better for you being there and the things that are important to
Right.
you have been implemented within the organization.
Mhm. Mhm. So with the Western States Communication Association, which is a regional association, and the National Communication Association, both of them are 4-year terms. And so with NCA specifically, when I ran as second vice president. I became second vice president first, and that's a year term. And then I moved into first vice president, which is a year-long term where you plan the convention. And then you become president for a year, and then you become immediate past president for a year. So you don't just run for a year, you run for a 4-year term that you're serving on the executive committee. I was also on finance committee for NCA for 3 years, which means that I was on the executive committee for 3 other years, probably about 5 years ago. And so this is not just a 1-year position. This is a 4-year position to make sure that, every year it's not a significant turnover for the association, and that, there are folks that stay on and help the organization with its legacy and knowing what happened the year before, frankly. In terms of leaving my legacy, a couple things that are really important to me that I hope are not just things that I've shown while I've been president of the associations. And one of those things is to make sure that I mentor other people to become leaders in these associations. And so that's not just necessarily to become president, but to become chairs of caucuses and divisions, to present their papers and to serve on legislative assembly, so that when I leave, I can look back on the association and know that it's in good hands. If I do that and nobody remembers anything else, but NCA is still here in 100 years and financially stable, then I know that I would have left my mark. But then the other thing is, a lot of these organizations, as we go from person to person, leader to leader, there can be some turnover. And I pride myself on really enhancing organizational policies and making sure that the decisions we make are ethical and equitable, but that also, we do things in a fair manner so that, if we have policies and procedures don't talk about X, that we create those policies and procedures to talk about X. With this last year, there's some things that are near and dear to me. We've got a lot of parents who come to NCA, and so I want to make sure we've got childcare available at the association, especially at our conferences. Not necessarily free, but at a reduced rate for members. I want to make sure that our members have access to the convention, and so whatever that means, whether it's because of, again, like lack of childcare, or it's because we need a space that is like wheelchair accessible, for example. I want to make sure that our conferences fit all of our members and are really inclusive. And then, with NCA, many of us think about NCA as a conference, but it's a whole association that gives grants, that has programming, that does writers retreats. And so I want our members to really access all of those materials. They have course syllabi that can help faculty members when they're teaching certain courses. And so our website is full of information that our members don't always know they need until they need it. And I would love it if our members understand that NCA is not just a conference, but that we offer a great deal of resources to all of our members.
Great. I'm going to jump to a question from the
Sure.
chat. Just keep them coming because, they sent it to me directly. So, how do you make sure that DEI is still being put in place so that all people of color, women, LGBT are represented in leadership roles? That's a great question. That's one
Yeah.
of my students. I'm super proud of that student. Great question.
You know, DEI work is, if you've seen the news lately, it's on a chopping block in a number of places. So as a dean and as a president of NCA, a past president of WSCA, a past president, pick a organization. DEI is really embedded in the work that I do. And so, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So if I'm thinking about one of our committees or one of our councils for NCA, for example, not just me, but the rest of the leadership, as we're looking to recruit new members, one of the things that we want to make sure we do is have really diverse members of these committees and on these councils. And I say diversity, not just in terms of race or gender or even socioeconomic status, but I'm also talking about diversity in terms of what our members are studying. So performance studies and, small group communication. We want to make sure we have a really a group that represents all of our members on these committees, diversity of thought, diversity of research. And as a leader in this way, I can push members and executive committee members, and here at Marymount, I can push my faculty searches to really explore and recruit beyond these traditional norms that we tend to do. And so even though I'm not in like a DEI, office right now, every single thing that I'm doing with my faculty hiring, with what the faculty are teaching, with the readings that they have, and I know I'm going back and forth between Marymount and NCA, but this is the same lens that I use for all of it. So I would encourage each of you on this call, like as you go into these leadership positions, it's important for all of you to recognize the importance of having a diverse group of faculty or employees or members, because they're the ones that are going to make sure the association is going in the right direction. And practically speaking, they're the ones that collectively a diverse thought process is shown to increase, funds, grants, and really benefits the various organizations. And so ultimately, this diversity lens is in everything that I do in terms of every single thing. It doesn't leave. And I'm saying this because as a Black woman, my parents are not from this country. And so I've got a lens that has kind of been embedded in me from the time I was a young child.
Awesome. So I've got another question here.
Mm.
So, and if you all, you can put them in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand, you can ask it, but I don't mind reading it for you.
Mm.
So, being a highly qualified woman in a position of authority, how do you handle people underestimating you in a healthy and calm way? Or is that not the best way to handle disrespect? When I interned, I had boys under me, males under me in a position, but I was always the one to get the coffee or to pick up breakfast just because I was a woman. So how do you handle that?
Okay, I'm not laughing at the conversation, but I'm already, about to roll my neck. So I will say that I have not, knock on wood, um, overtly received or felt discrimination. And I think part of it is because I'm really direct in how I speak to people. And so I feel like, I've actually maybe heard the opposite. So I've heard that people are scared of me. And so you can get that from two different ways, right? So she's scary. So no, there's no way they're going to ask me to get coffee or anything else. But there's also a fear that comes with, being a Black woman as a leader. If I'm just as assertive as a counterpart who doesn't look like me, with that level of assertion comes fear. On the other hand, if you're not as assertive or straightforward or confident, even with that may come people relegating you to certain like domestic roles. So, I would say no. And that's going to feel uncomfortable. But if someone says like, oh, hey, Dr. Harris, are you able to get the coffee? You could turn it right back and say, no, but I'd like a chai latte with oat milk when you get it, right? Thanks, grande, please, and turn it back on them. And, you know, it only takes you to say it one time.
Mhm.
And not necessarily in a mean way, but with a calm, even tone. Or the next day, hey, thanks for getting that tea, that coffee, or whatever. And just know that even if you're in that role and you say it one time, or you do it one time, that people are going to start thinking about you in that way. And
Mhm.
I'll say this because I remember I was in a meeting one time with another Black female, and like somebody dropped something on the floor. And the first thing she said was, "Oh, I'll pick it up." And I just looked at her, I was like, "You don't get up off that floor." And it's not because I didn't think that she should do that. I just didn't think she should do that in that space. And so as a woman, a Black woman, um, I have to be hyper aware of the way that I move and the things that I do. And she didn't drop the stuff. Like if she's over here getting napkins and she's my equal counterpart, and while everyone else is looking at her and what that looked like is like, okay, thinking about how Black women were relegated, that's just not a space that I would expect her to be cleaning up on the floor, for example. You could do that at home, right? You could
Mm-hmm.
do that at your church potluck, that's
Mm-hmm.
fine. So I would just be hyper aware. And if someone asks you to do something, unless that's your job description, then kindly say no.
Right.
And
And
it's going to
that
feel
leads
uncomfortable.
Yeah,
And that's okay.
that makes me think of something that happened to me in the past, and I spoke with you, was about an office, about a space, because I'm just a giver by nature,
You
and I
are,
was like,
yeah.
oh, I don't need that space. No, you can go ahead and have it. And I remember you telling me, no, take the space,
Yeah.
because we are fighting for the physical space to
Right.
possess as well as just
Yes.
the space in these spaces. So you need to
Yes.
take the office. And so
Yeah.
I was like,
Will.
okay, well,
Right.
when you put it that way, it made me look at it differently,
Yes. And
right?
the reason I said that to you, Dr. Harris, was because I had to do that same thing. So I remember when I first became, I was interim dean for a little bit because the previous dean had left to become provost at another university. And so her office was so beautiful and big. I just couldn't even imagine myself, even in an
Mm,
interim role, in the office. And so I just said, okay, well, we can make it a conference room. I'll stay in my office. And it was another dean, a white male, who was like, if you don't get in that office, like, get in the office, be the dean, take up the space. And sometimes that work is in us, and it's not other people putting it on us, but it's us putting it on ourselves, where we want to make ourselves smaller, or we feel uncomfortable. Take up the space. I'm in the office now. It's beautiful. You can't see all of it.
hmm.
But part of it is telling yourself or giving yourself permission to say no to
Yeah.
something. Like, no,
Hmm.
I'm not going to get that coffee for you, but also giving yourself permission to take up the space where you belong. And that right
Right.
there is the internal work that you have to do.
Right. And I think too, kind of like we're talking about ladies first, like, because you already are, sometimes people will doubt your qualifications for being there, or think that you got there because of a program, because you are a woman and you're filling a quota. So you already come in feeling like, oh, well, they're already looking at me like less than. So
But
I've
here,
got
I
to
need to
prove that I
interrupt
don't
you,
need it.
but I want to interrupt you though, because a lot of times we'll say that. And a lot
Yeah.
of times it's true, to be honest with you, but sometimes we think that and nobody else thinks it.
And
And
because
that's
we
where it's
internalize
more
it, right? Because it's
exactly,
internalized. That's what I'm trying to say. So
exactly.
we have these perceptions because it has been, in multiple fields. So, like if it's journalism, so we
Yeah.
look at, so I have some students in a tutorial looking at women in sports casting, you know what
Mhm,
I mean? And how
mhm,
their question, so how can you commentate on a football game when you've never,
mhm,
thrown the ball before,
mhm,
so
mhm.
they lack them. So I think we internalize a lot of things and we bring that with us to these
Yes,
leadership roles. And so
yes,
trying to find ways to navigate that and stand in our power, and possess a
exactly.
space that we're qualified to possess.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we second guess ourselves sometimes when nobody else is.
Yeah, and I will say, in my position as president of NCA and president of Western WSCA, I didn't guess myself. There was no part of me that said,
Mhm.
"Oh, do I belong here?"
Right.
It was like, of course I belong here, and of course I'm going to do it. But I also
Mhm.
felt like I had that support. I'd also established those relational connections, and so I didn't feel that same level of fear that I felt years ago when I was late to that legislative assembly meeting. And I was like, oh my
Mhm.
goodness, I just can't go. Like I was by this time, you can't tell me nothing at this point. Like I'm
Mhm.
in this space, I'm going to occupy it. And I don't feel doubt or fear
Mhm.
in this
Mhm.
space because I kind of pushed myself years ago to get through that, and here I am.
Awesome. That reminds me of Dr. Camille Anderson last month or our last workshop. I am the table. So no, I don't need to bring a table because I am the
Right.
table.
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
love it.
Mhm.
All right. So I have another question in the chat. How have women contributed to shaping innovative communication strategies? And what can we learn from their experience to inspire future generations?
Okay, that's a great question.
My students are awesome. These are Marymount students asking these
I
amazing
know.
questions.
I listen, I understand. There are the work of women in the field of communication has been profound, to be honest. Within the National Communication Association, we have a women's caucus, and then we have a feminist studies division. We also have the Organization for Research on Women in Communication, though they changed their name last year, and I can't remember it offhand. I was a past president of that association, and this in the past, I think 2 or 3 years, we've got a number of women who are editors of our major journals. So like Stacey Sowards and Kimberly Moffett and Rachel Griffin and Bernadette Calafell, who is now about to be chair of our publications council. Like, not only are women creating these innovative strategies for communicating, but women are also creating these theories that understand how we communicate, not just women, but people in general. And if you want to keep going up a level, women are serving as journals of our as editors of our major communication journals, which means that they're helping to review other articles and submissions and sending feedback. And then, you want to go a step further. We've got another woman who's coming in to be the publications chair, who's going to like oversee all of those things. And so women are really making strides in terms of not only how we communicate, but how we study communication and how we publish about communication. And so what you'll see are more inclusive ways to respond to people who submit. You'll see more inclusive ways to get people to serve on journals and to serve as reviewers and to serve as editors. You'll see different types of articles and special series being written and accepted for publication. We do have a number of openings for editors this year for our journals, and so we'll see how that turns out. But, somebody just shoot me a message in the chat. But women are really making great strides toward pushing communication forward.
All right, so I'm going to fold this question. This is a good question because I had a question kind of similar near the end, but we'll
Mhm.
ask it now. So, how do you balance your professional life and your personal life when do you know your limits? So, my thing is like, how do you
Mhm.
prevent burnout? Because you
Yes,
do multiple things, and so like,
right,
because I'll toot
right.
your horn and share a little
Yeah,
bit about you. You're a mom, you're a
yeah.
business owner. On top of all of these things, your family runs a successful business. It's been featured in Oprah's favorite things twice. Dr. Niles Goins and her husband run Puzzle Huddle. They're the founders of Puzzle Huddle, which is
Mhm.
an organization, a company that makes culturally responsive
Mhm.
puzzles for children of color. And so it's amazing. And so she has that hat. She's the CEO of her house, CEO of company, dean of a college, runs a communication association. Like, how do you prevent burnout?
I'm going on
When do you find
vacation
your
right now, so I'll see you guys later. I just. Um, so yes, when you say it, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I must have made some mistakes. But so I'll say, I mentioned that I the reason I went to communication was because I wanted to like do drawing, I want to paint. And so even though I'm doing all these things, I've realized I don't have as much time to like create in a sense with my art. So that has definitely suffered because while I could kind of carve out like an hour here or there, I really need like some undivided time to be able to really create. So that side of my brain is not doing all the things I would love it to do right now. But with Puzzle Huddle, for example, my husband does most of that. Like that was his dream. And so I help him with like some of the, well, a lot of the like the operational parts of it. But again, that's still the same side of my brain, like operations and sense making and putting things together. That side of my brain at this point though is at max. So I will say at this point, if someone were to say, hey, and I volunteer at my kids' school and stuff too. So if someone were to say, hey, can I put you in charge of a project? No, 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 no. But if someone were to say, hey, do you want to go to like an art studio or a vacation in Barbados, all expenses paid, right? Or something where it's a different part of my brain, then I still have that availability. So I'm hyper aware of um the things that my brain is doing and where it's at max. So it's at max at planning and scheduling, like with all these things. But it's not at max on other areas. So for me to help prevent burnout, I know I have a really high level of self-awareness where I know like the things that I do well and I'm able to separate them. Everyone's not like that though. Sometimes you just feel like tired because somebody else asked you to do something. And if that's the case, then you need to say no. And there is a book, I cannot remember the author, Resistance is Rest. It's a great read that one of my coaches, my executive coaches recommended for me about how rest should be like encompassed in our daily lives. So not just like this one thing that we do like, once every couple of months where you like go get a pedicure or whatever. It needs to be part of every day. And so I'm aware of like, let me put in my calendar this hour or 30 minutes is going to be for my lunch, and during lunch I'm not going to do any work, and during lunch my administrative assistant knows, don't come in here asking questions about this project unless it's an emergency, but this is the time for me to kind of just think about something else or watch some video on Netflix and get me out of that part of my brain so I can come back to it later. So not feeling burnout means knowing you, like what
Mhm,
makes you feel burnout. What are the
mhm,
parts of your life where you could stick like a 10 or 15-minute nap in? Sometimes if you're not a napper, don't try it because that could turn into an hour very quickly. Um, but think about the parts of your life where you are at max, and then don't add anything else to that part. Add something to another part where you're
mhm,
creating or something that's really fun for you. And then that'll help you to kind of take those deep breaths and really to be able to, um, you know, come back to us and be okay.
mhm. Awesome. Now, if is there any advice that you can give? At one point you did run the undergraduate writers conference for undergraduate students at for Western States Communication Association, and we have
Yeah,
quite a few Lambda Pi Eta
yeah.
members here. How can they maximize membership in just and if it's not so through any of the communication organizations, so NCA,
Mm-hmm.
any of the organizations, journalism, anything, how can
Mm-hmm.
they maximize student membership in these organizations?
Well, first, being a part of Lambda Pi Eta is A plus. So you are already a step ahead. This year, so NCA had its leadership retreat last week, literally, and we talked about Lambda Pi Eta and how we really want to increase the students who are joining the organization. And it's interesting that like the number of students who are joining it goes up and then it kind of pauses a little bit in terms of growth and then it goes up again. And so I would say that, the resources for Lambda Pi Eta are wonderful. So you've already accomplished step one if you're part of Lambda Pi Eta. The second, though, I was part of WSCA, or the Western States Communication Association. The closest regional one is the Eastern Communication Association.
Mhm,
Um, and that's a regional conference, and if being a part of a national conference and presenting with like a really big group of people feels intimidating, those regional ones are really nice and comfortable spaces to present your work. So think about a paper that you turned in class that you're really proud of. Think about a paper that you started to write and that maybe you stopped halfway or at the beginning that you should continue. And these regional conferences have these undergraduate scholars research conferences where it's just a day where undergraduate students present their work,
mhm,
and they get awards and plaques and they get reviewed by faculty to give them feedback. Eventually, if you wanted, you could present your work in your classes or, study it in your master's program later on. But these are all really great opportunities to meet people, as you know, and that have written your textbooks and that are actually reviewing your work. So if you feel a little intimidated, or if you feel like, all right, well, let me just try this out, those undergraduate conferences at the regional associations are really going to be your best bet. I'll
Mhm.
also say, Dr. Harris, a lot of these regionals, but especially the National Communication Association, have opportunities for grants. And so we have student travel grants for the National Communication Association. They give you your check once you get to the conference, so you can cash it and it can cover some of your housing costs or some of your travel costs. A lot of universities will provide funding for students if they're presenting at conferences.
Mhm.
So there are opportunities to go to these conferences that you don't have to pay out of pocket. I would just say, work on the research first, because it probably takes about 4 or 5 months from the time you submit your paper to the time the conference begins.
Mhm.
For the undergrad one, it's probably about 2 or 3 months, but there's some time in between. So pace yourself and be prepared to get those funds to attend those conferences.
Yeah, I know I benefited from in both my undergrad and my master's program grants. So travel grants or
Mhm.
hotel grants, reduced room rates, and they're a great place to kind of meet others that are feel. So AEJMC has under
Yes.
every organization within the field, whether it's journalism or more human communication based, they all have undergraduate level organizations within or divisions that will help you decide what it is, especially when you're looking at career trajectory.
Right.
And like, because I know that Copenhagen Center, what we do is we do a leadership boot camp
Mhm.
yearly. So we submit names for our senior students to go, and they do a Zoom meeting. It's all virtual where they get to be poured into. So I'm plugging this for some of my students that are coming up that are not seniors yet, right? So I recommend our students to that all the time, and so that's hosted by the Copenhagen Centers for students that are graduating, which is great. So I have a really good question here. So with the threat of AI and Chat GPT on the rise, where
Mhm.
do you see that? How does that affect our field of communication with that on the rise? What is the threat, and is there a plan to deal with it within the field?
It's interesting because we talked about that at the leadership retreat, but then as a dean, we're also having these conversations with our faculty members and with the other deans and the leaders of a university. So as I'm engaged in these conversations, they're almost two polar ideas and suggestions. So one is like, let's just use it, like AI can be used to write a draft of your paper, and then you fix up the rest of it. And then other faculty are like, no, you need to create from scratch. And then the other thing it touches on, or for NCA at least, policies and procedures. So right now our policies are, you can't submit a paper that's plagiarized, right? You can't submit a paper where you don't attribute whatever quote to, Dr. Harris, who wrote this amazing article. That's unacceptable. What happens if you submit something that was fully or partially AI generated? And I will say with NCA and with Marymount, it's shared governance. So no one is going to make these decisions like, hey, I'm president, so I want to say no AI because it's cheating, and let me bang the gavel, and so let it be written, so let it be done. That's not actually how it works. It results in a number of really long, detailed, sometimes controversial conversations between all the members of the association. So what happens as a result is we're not going to be first to make a decision about AI. I would not expect us as a national association to come up with a policy about AI in the next month. However, it is on my list of things to do this year because we're reviewing our policies and procedures about what is acceptable for submissions. And so as I think about like AI and GPT, um, I want to say that we are still engaged in the process of figuring out best ways to manage it. And even from a university perspective, Dr. Harris, I don't know if as a collective we want to mandate to our faculty how they should or should not use AI in the classroom. I think that also sets a dangerous precedent where we're like, hey, nobody can use it and you will fail. or everybody should use it to help write their papers. I think it's discipline specific. And um, and I think that the faculty should get to be able to, decide how to use AI. The other thing that, people have been talking about is with AI reflects society. And
Mhm.
so if society is, racist or misogynistic, AI is going to reflect that.
Mhm.
And so we also have to be careful as students and as faculty members how we're using it, and in our writing and what our writing sounds like and the pictures that we're using, because we could often reflect what society looks like when we're at the end trying to be, anti-racist or, whatever it is, these ethical contributors to society. And AI is not always going to be where we want to go. AI is going to reflect what we're doing right now.
That's very true, especially like because we're in the field of communication. So
Yeah.
when you're looking at the practical jobs that we do or the careers that we do
Mhm.
after we finish college, right? So of course, every instructor wants a student to have academic integrity and write their own original work. But
Right.
if you
Yeah.
enter a field where AI enhances what you're doing, so it's a balance. And so I like how you highlight it shouldn't be a mandate. It should be, because sometimes my thing is like, still, should we just go back to Blue Book? The Blue Book test. And so when I tell my students that, they're like, what's a Blue Book? I'm like, we used to have to go to the bookstore, get a book to write
Yeah.
inside it, turn into
We
our
were using Blue
professor.
Books even up to a couple of years
It
ago.
we it was
Yeah.
it's crazy, right? So
Yeah.
when we look at the advances that we take, so I think we have time for these last two questions. So I have one
Okay.
from a student, and then I have my last one that I want to end on. So, what is your opinion on hiring more Gen Z employees or people bringing more Gen Z in to hear fresh, new perspectives on how to move the National Communication Association forward and improve it for the future?
Yes, I love that question. So on the executive committee for NCA, we have no Gen Z. Uh, and I'll tell you, the executive committee includes immediate past president, a president, a first vice president, a second vice president. But it also includes a finance committee chair who should have a great deal of experience with budgeting, like large organizations, because NCA's budget is fairly significant, like in the millions. But then we also have a publications committee, publications council chair who like is over all of our publications, and our publications generally are edited by people who are like associate or full professors because they've got to send rejection letters, and then it kind of gets political. And then same for our Teaching and Research Council. We've got the person who is the chair of that has had like extensive experience. So we wrestle between, all right, the people who are leading these committees are often the people who are the experts in it and who have had extensive experience and who have been in the field for, for decades, frankly. However, our committee members is where we get a lot more variation. So even though the executive committee has like folks who aren't necessarily Gen Z, we do have much more variety in terms of folks serving on these committees. But I will say this, when we think about the types of service that we do, the service to NCA and serving on these committees, it can be intense. It can be a lot of work. And so we wrestle with having assistant professors in these roles when they're also going up for tenure and promotion, and when they're teaching, and when maybe they're stuck in the middle of a controversy when they're still untenured faculty members, and we don't want to put them in this awkward position that may affect if they get tenured or promoted. And so we wrestle with like, yeah, we want the voice of Gen Z, but we also want to protect them from being in this political position where if it doesn't work out, this could be their career. So the efforts that we're making are like, yes, run for offices, serve on in leadership positions for the various interest groups. These are like lower level stakes where things go wrong, your career is not going to collapse. So you can still make change and offer solutions and recommendations. The larger positions that can be more controversial, we think generally that if Gen Z participates in it, we don't want your career to necessarily be on the line. We want you to feel comfortable disagreeing and making waves without other folks at other institutions thinking that you don't deserve to get tenure or promoted.
So that's going to bring me to my last question because we've got about 6 minutes left. But because I think I want you to be able to answer this. So my question is, what advice would you give to other young ladies wanting to be first and, you know, fill those areas in various spaces within the communication field, whether it be in journalism, in human communication, research, scholarship? What advice would you give them as they move forward?
Mhm. It's probably gonna I think back when I was going to that legislative assembly meeting, I felt really nervous. And since I have not had that feeling since. And so that initial time that you volunteer when you're like the only one and when it's in a new space, it might feel uncomfortable. You might feel nervous, but you got to keep going. Even if it means that you go back to your room and you decide, all right, well, I'll try again next year or whenever it is. It doesn't have to, that discomfort doesn't have to dictate what you do after that. You've got to press through that discomfort and continue to be a leader, because what you will offer is far more valuable with you being in that space than with you allowing that discomfort to cause you not to be in that space. And I think about Janetta Sims. She is the person who is she's first vice president right now, Dr. Janetta Sims, and she's slated to become the second Black president of the association. And I remember one of the things that she said to me when I was, I think, running for office. I was doing something, who knows? And she said, Marnel, the type of leader you are is based on your personality. You're just doing a really exceptional job. And the reason that stood out to me was because, the first time I was like in that room, I was looking around at how other people led. And I thought about like all the good things that they did. And I was kind of hard on myself, like, oh, maybe I need to be a little more, whatever the person was reflecting in their leadership. And what Dr. Sims said to me really gave me permission to lead in a way that was frankly in alignment with my personality. Like, all right, sometimes I'm gonna make a joke, sometimes I'm gonna be casual, but I will be me, and I'll be straightforward, and folks will get to know who I am. And that's really proven to be, sound advice for me. And so I'll say, that first time that you step into a room, it might be uncomfortable, but really have that confidence about your own personality and your own leadership style. Take the good things from other folks, but know that, who you are at your core is good enough, and don't be apologetic. You've got to let that fear drive you to continue to do it. And then at some point, it's just going to go away. You just be like, you know what? You got to take it or leave it. I'm here. I'm in this space. I'm taking up space. And I'm unapologetically going to take up space. And then be nice. That's the other thing. I think that, unfortunately, being a female and a Black female, folks either think you're scary or you should be, in a servitude position. And neither is the case, but being straightforward and being nice can go hand in hand. And I found that to help me be really successful in the various leadership positions that I've been in.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dr. Niles Goins. I had one, but this one is a little long. Just in one soundbite, how are you going to be the president in this for NCA in this presidential election in this polarized society this cycle right now? What are your plans for misinformation and disinformation? You got about 1.5 minutes to answer that.
I have 1.5 minutes. So I will say, I'll treat it like I treat, my kids. Like, all sorts of stuff is happening at school or wherever else. And the best thing I can do is be an exemplary leader. And that means, and I'll say this again, I pride myself on being ethical and on, NCA is an organization where we have free speech. And so you don't have to disagree with me at all, but we will communicate in an ethical manner. And the best thing I can do as a leader is to exemplify that in everything that I'm doing, how I lead, how I talk, and how I interact with people.
So on that note, that's an amazing last word. I want to thank you, Dr. Niles Goins, for joining us today. I want to thank all of you that have logged in, that are watching in person, or that will be listening to the broadcast later. Thank you. Thank you. You all have a wonderful afternoon, and keep an eye out for the workshop that'll be hosted next month. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Harris, for facilitating this.